Oh. Hello. Welcome to. Should I? Hello and welcome to the FDP subawards subcommittee session. My name is Amanda Humphrey. I am one of the co-chairs. I'm from Northeastern University.
Is your thing working?
No, it is not.
Work.
This one. You guys have working ones.
Oh, you could share this one.
Yeah, we'll just share that one. Okay.
In the middle. Get the water away before we get electrocuted.
There we go. Okay.
Disaster. Okay. Did you introduce yourself? One more time.
Amanda Humphrey, Northeastern University.
Stephanie Scott, Columbia University.
Amanda Haymaker, Purdue University.
So we have a packed agenda today. So we're actually going to start by inviting our friends from the Expanded Clearinghouse to come up and go over their slides. We're having a joint session with them for this session.
Oh, okay.
I think Pamela's in.
Oh, yeah. You want me to
Sit over here, because I gotta do stuff
and
on
you
my
can just signal me when you want me to change the slide.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? It's working, right? So Pamela was gonna start, but I think she's still with the Foreign Influence panel. So I will start. And it will just be Pamela and I. Courtney and Chris won't be speaking, but they're right there, ready to answer questions, at the ready. So we didn't think we had enough for a whole session, so the subward gals were gracious enough to offer us 10 minutes. So we thought we'd give you a little update. Let's just make sure, are you all interested in a little bit of a clearinghouse update, or? No, it's okay. So hopefully you all saw this on the listserv. We sent out the invitation to a cohort of non-FDP members. So we're very excited about this. It's been a lot of questions, a lot of decisions had to be made in order for this to happen. So that invitation is out, and we originally started with interested organizations. We took a look at some rankings to make sure we were getting institutions in that would give us the kind of biggest bang for the buck as far as subaward activity. And we've just been doing a lot to get ready for this. We went through and updated instructions and web pages and help text, and we had done the survey to see if there were some fields we could remove to streamline the clearinghouse, so we have removed those and done some just little tweaks to the system here and there. So we had sent out an email summarizing that. We also, so I think there were 34 invitations that we sent out. We have a waiting list already, so we hear almost every day from somebody that wants in. And we are charging them, we came to the decision to charge them $750 a year at this point, and the year will be a little bit longer. So we'll be bringing in a little bit of money. We're in the process of, we're talking with the executive committee about how exactly this is going to be structured, whether it'll be called a limited membership, or if there's some specific way we need to reference it for tax purposes, other purposes. So we still have a little bit of information out on that.
Next slide.
So this is the list of invited organizations. If you can't see that, if it's too tiny, we'll of course share these slides. So this is the first crew. If you were expecting, if there's friends of FDP in the room and you were expecting your organization on there and don't see it for some reason, let us know. If you see your name on there and you didn't expect it to be on there, let us know that too. But this is the crew we're looking to add. So again, these are some of the things, just real quick, that we updated. We changed the business use agreement a little bit, just to reference the non-FDP members joining, and we switched it to call it a profile participation agreement. We also updated the API use agreement. We're collecting information now on the vendors. So if participating organization wants to get an API token and requests it, they'll have to answer the question about, do they use a vendor system and who is the vendor? And we're going to require a signature from that vendor going forward so that we know that they agree that they're only using the token for that client and not for their broader business. And I'm not looking directly at you, Roger, for any reason, I swear.
It's all right, because when we do it, we let the clients put it in themselves.
Okay, there you go. And we updated the instructions, the data dictionary, some of the things you can see on the home page, the help text, the help page, and the resources page. Next slide. I just talked about that with the request API token. And so there's functionality in there, thanks to our wonderful developers, that if you have that signed agreement, you can just upload it to the system, so we'll keep it. Just a little note, we're actually not having much activity with the APIs. Still no increase, so just an FYI, people were acting like they were really interested in that, and then we built it, and there's actually not much use for it. We built a little help desk form, so you have to be logged into the system to get at this, but if you always go to the help tab up in the top bar, it'll take you to the help page, and there's a button to a little help form. It will email us just like normal, but it helps kind of guide in how you're asking the questions, if you have a problem with your profile, if it's a technical issue, whatnot. So we can just start to keep that information and help us track it a little bit. Oh, just real quick, you can still email us directly to the FDP EC help, but if you use that form, that helps us a little bit, so we encourage you to use that. Again, on the survey, we removed the fields that we learned from all of you were the least needed fields. So these are the ones that have been removed now. Next. So our tentative timeline, again, the invitation went out. We're hoping for acceptance responses by June 4th. We're tentatively saying we're going to kick off on the 10th and theoretically then have all the profiles reviewed and published by July 1st. We still, again, have this little question out about exactly, we might have to tweak a little bit of the wording in the profile participation agreement, and there's actually people on the Clearinghouse Steering Committee that are looking at me funny because they're hearing this for the first time too. It came out of a discussion in the executive committee the other day. It shouldn't hold us up, hopefully, but we might have to just tweak a little bit of language. And of course, we'll keep you all updated if timelines change. And then just a reminder to, I'm just double checking to see if Pamela has come in. No. A reminder on your profiles, please update when your F&A rates or fringe benefit rate agreements change. Really want to remind you guys to get in the habit of updating your profiles a couple times a year. Anytime those things change, your contacts change, any of your certification dates, and then it's audit season. So we have people within our steering committee tracking that if your audit was due and submitted in the federal audit clearinghouse, then you should have updated it in our clearinghouse. Next slide.
Pamela's here.
Pamela, you want to talk about this slide?
Sure.
She loves talking about single audit. I realized I didn't even.
Sorry. We've been really concerned about keeping the data fresh in the clearinghouse. And so we have right now identified 18 organizations that don't have their audits up to date. And some of you are doing a really good job of ratting out each other by telling us about that, as well as we have reports, that we can run. But we did want to remind people that people committed to keeping their information current, and we can't use it effectively for subrecipient monitoring if it's not there. And so please do keep your audit information updated. We've just discovered a new reason to keep this updated is that some federal agencies are starting to express interest in how they might be able to use the clearinghouse. But they absolutely have to know that the data is current in order to be able to do that. And so we want to help make sure, and if we can have a really, really tiny number of errors or information that's outdated, that just goes to speaking to improved and enhanced credibility of the clearinghouse. The other thing we wanted to just tell you about is that we have 13 organizations who've updated their audits behind the scenes, but they haven't passed their profile all the way through the process. So usually it got updated by whoever is the person assigned to work on the profile, But if it either got sent to a certifier and that certifier has left the institution or no longer has that role, or somebody missed an email, not that that would ever happen, and didn't realize that they needed to certify the profile, so it got stuck. And eventually it gets unstuck because it shows up on our lists and we send reminders and track people down. But it'll be really helpful if you can just check if you're the one doing the profile updates, or if you're the certifier, just kind of check a little bit and make sure that you've certified anything that's out there, especially in audit season, because we know it's going to change then, and when your SAM record needs to be completed. Okay. Should I keep going? Okay. So we're getting ready for the rest of the year to publish that first cohort of the non-FTP members. Depending on how easily and quickly and well that goes, we may consider adding one more cohort before the next FTP cycle in September 2020. We'll kind of decide that based on how this first one goes. We think that, Lynette probably said this, we think that this group may require a bit more help because they haven't heard all these sessions over time and haven't been part of FTP, so it might be newer and more challenging to them. But we're just going to kind of see how that goes. And if it goes pretty well, then I think we are going to talk about adding one more group for that. So we do kind of have to figure out what the business plan is for the clearinghouse. What are the costs of running the clearinghouse to FTP? How is that impacted by the number of organizations that are in the clearinghouse? Are we getting enough revenue in to cover the costs of non-members? So we have to get through that process and understand that so we can talk to the finance committee at FTP and make sure that this remains a viable type of thing. We know business-wise that the more numbers of institutions or entities that are in there will be good for all of us because we'll have more and more and more of our population that we can use the clearinghouse for instead of subrecipient commitment forms. But we also have to have enough infrastructure in place to manage effectively. So we're going out, as I said, we're just starting to see this interest from sponsors. We've already done one briefing for NSF. Wade Wargo did one for ONR. We're going back to NSF, and we're going to be reaching out to some of the other agencies. But one of the questions they've already asked us is about this data credibility, and so we want to make sure that it's super credible at the point when we go out on these site visits. So, yeah, and then the last point up there is there's a historic member profile system at FTP. I don't know how to say that nicely, I'm pretty sure the last time it was updated, I was in college, and that has been a while. So we're trying to see if there's an opportunity here to somehow take what we're already doing at the clearinghouse and then merge it in with the institution profile that exists in this other database so that we could keep the two in harmony and not have to update both with a lot of the same information. I think you know, steering committee, if you're here, can you stand up? So, come on guys. So, okay, yeah. So, yeah, there you go. So thank you guys for all the work that you do, for all of us on that. And if you have a question about any of the areas, you can see who there, and you'll have the slides out afterwards, who to contact. Go ahead. I wanted to point out one thing on this page. This is really information just in the slide deck, so you can have it later if you want it handy. But Lynette talked about the fact that we have this new web-based form where you can get help. I wanted to remind people where to find it. So that's here. So where you do is you go up on the top and you go to help and getting help, and then it says send a message. If you click on that button, it will prompt you to log in if you're not already logged in, and it gives you the web-based form to complete for help. And as I'm sure you heard already, that really helps us keep track of what kinds of help requests we've got, as well as reduces the back and forth because we get the information we need to actually address the issue the first time. And so that speeds up getting the right answer out to people. Okay. And then you know who your co-chairs are. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have time if anybody has any questions?
Oh, any questions? Oh, they do have questions. Use the microphone. I told you have no choice. And you can pass it around. You don't have to get up.
Hi, we were talking about the accuracy of the information, and I have some very serious concerns about it. Okay. I recently became the FTP representative due to a personnel change in my office. And I thought, well, I better go on there and make sure the information is correct. And I found that my institution's information was incorrect. I've contacted the appropriate people to have it changed. But as I'm going through, I use the clearinghouse, which is wonderful, I love it. But now I'm finding, I'm checking people's information in their audit, and I found 7 or 8 in the past couple of weeks that are just not accurate. Ours hasn't been accurate for 2 years, that's probably our fault. So I was wondering about the process, since I'm new to this, the process, once the information is updated, the verification.
Yeah, sure.
Microphone? You need a microphone? Yeah.
Oh, this one. You need this one.
Here, hang on.
Oh, here, use it. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Oh, perfect.
When Robert and Webb are doing the reviews for updates to regular profiles, or Lynette and I are doing the reviews on brand new profiles, there are certain fields that we independently validate, and there are other fields where we don't, because they've been certified by an authorized organizational official at the member institution as being accurate. So we're updating, we're checking for things like, we check Sam's record to make sure the name of the institution matches with what it says it's supposed to be in Sam. We have let go certain things like an extra the or a missing the, something like that, but generally we're trying to get an exact match there. We're checking if you said that you're part of a major audit, a different audit entity, that it actually, your audit says it's a different audit entity, so that it looks like that. We're checking every hyperlink to make sure that it not only works, but it goes to a page immediately, as opposed to I have to then hunt through 7 more pages to get the information I actually need, and we get those fixed and changed. We make sure that every field appears to have valid data in it, and I say appears to because we're not like independently looking up, your AHART number or something, but we are checking to make sure the number looks like it should look for that type of number. Those types of things. Can you think of other things we've been checking?
That's about it.
We do review the audit, so
Yeah.
if you do, I guess I'll say there's.
Microphone. You have no choice. No choice.
I think I can project.
No.
We're
No.
recording it.
So, yeah, we look at the audit report. So if you find something and you think that it's an audit report, or that the clearinghouse is not reflecting the audit report, email the help. We are looking at that stuff. It can get confusing if you talk about a primary audit entity, especially the states, versus Canvas.
Oh, sure.
And we just recently have done an extra review of this primary audit entity. So there is a little bit of cleanup needed there, and so you'll hear from us. And I would just emphasize what Pamela said earlier. This is your guys' data. So if you see other people's data that's wrong, feel free to contact them, let us know, but it's only as good as the data that you all put in. I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but you're not reviewing the audits and making sure they answer the questions right as far as the additions.
We are.
Oh, they say they are. Okay. So we're trying to get, I guess, as much as we can. All right, maybe one more quick question?
It's not even a question, it's just a comment.
Microphone. Okay.
You have to use it.
You have no choice. Okay.
It's just a comment. I just wanted to let you guys know there's a
this page only, when you're in the edit format, it prints the published version. It doesn't print the edited version. So like I was trying to print certain pages that I had made changes to send them to other offices to confirm the information was correct. And I had to print the entire document, not just that one page. So that's all. I don't know if that's
We'll tell the program.
Let the technical team know.
Sorry, we're over our 10 minutes.
Oh, that's okay.
That's all right.
Oh, you can put it in the
Back
stand.
over there.
There we go. Okay,
Do you
go
wanna-
ahead.
All right. Hello. We are now going to turn our attention back to the templates. So we are almost done actually in looking at the template update for this coming 2019 release. So one of the things that we really needed to address, and one of the reasons we're doing a release, is the certificate of confidentiality language related to NIH and the changes there. So as all of you probably know or remember, we do have pilot language out there currently on the FDP website. So if you go to the subaward forms page, you'll see the templates, and right under the templates, you'll see pilot language for certificates of confidentiality. We have two choices up there, a long one and a short one. And part of the task of the working group was to, for the template review, was to talk about, well, which language should we have in the FDP subaward templates. So we talked about a lot of different facets of this. One is what language institutions feel most comfortable with. Another piece of it is how it fits on the template, quite frankly, formatting, length, all of that. And then also consistency across the different formats of templates. So we have two FDP subaward templates, a cost reimbursement and a fixed price. Then we also have our clinical trial agreement. Then we have the FDP foreign cost reimbursement, the FDP foreign fixed price. Then we have the contract sample language or template as well. So there's 6 different documents there, and we want to try our best to be as consistent as possible across those various documents. So what the group wanted to bring forward for a proposal is a suggestion to use option 1, which is a longer piece of language for the clinical trial template and the FDP sub-award template. So you may say, well, why do we need to use a long language for this? Well, it's a little bit more comprehensive. Some institutions felt more comfortable with the slightly longer language. Interestingly, in discussion, people did feel that the shorter language, option 2, might be more appropriate for the foreign template when you're working with a foreign organization that maybe just isn't quite as familiar with the ins and outs of a certificate of confidentiality, that the simple term may work best for them. So what I think we've decided to do with this is we're going to be disseminating a survey and an email, and we're just going to ask people to vote and give us your feedback on that through voting. But we also wanted to take a minute and see if anyone had any immediate thoughts or reactions to this specific plan that we're putting forward right now.
Yep.
So my initial reaction is this seems a little counterintuitive, right? So I think as fellow FDP institutions, we rely on each other to hold ourselves to a certain standard, where I would think the shorter language would be appropriate, where somebody who is a foreign institution who's not commonly getting NIH funding, I would think the longer version would be more appropriate to help walk them through this process. So I'm kind of surprised to see those flip, and wanting to pursue 2 sort of the reasons why.
Part of it was because the shorter language was simpler, just simpler for them to understand. It really is that basic.
And I think the other piece of it, Jamie, because I mean, personally, I was a little bit more like, well, why don't we just use the short one across the board except for the clinical trial? But I think a lot of people expressed very reasonable thought that, you know, when you have, you may have clinical work or clinical data, and it may not be a clinical trial situation where that data is being shared. And so I think the thought was, you know, this is people's protected health information, it is their data. The certificate of confidentiality requirements whether or not it's collected in a clinical trial setting under the clinical trial template or not. Really, we really want to drive home that point about making sure that people are aware this is human subject data. You are subject to the certificate of confidentiality and all of the things that come with that. And I think the other part of it too is a lot of institutions are grappling with the fact that, you know, we now are the ones as PTEs being put in a position to determine when a COC is applicable. And so just making sure that everyone is really aware of when that COC is being flowed down to a subrecipient were some of the reasons that we're putting this forward. Now, we are still putting this out as a survey vote, so that's not to say that people couldn't come back and say, you know what, we really do want to see the language be the shorter language across the board, or we want everyone to have the longer language, and in all the instances we should use option 1. And all of those choices are good discussion points to have, so we really, you know, are looking for people's feedback. We've left plenty of spaces for people to leave comments and give us more, but a lot of what we get for comments when we ask these questions is our OGC prefers this one.
Yeah.
And it's a little hard for us to kind of navigate the specifics of that.
And I understand. I think I want to go back to one point that you just made. It was that it's the PTE's responsibility to determine whether or not the sub needs a COC.
To flow it down.
To slow it down,
yeah.
not whether or not they need it just to slow down the term. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. 'Cause
Our responsibility is to communicate the COC policy. That's what it says in the anti-trans policy statement. And so we made it really broad where we're saying you really should include this language anytime there's human subjects involved or anytime there's human subjects data exchange. Don't question any further because it will get too tedious. Just slap the language on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is just for, especially for people who are maybe not here with us today, just to put the language up there so you can see what it is. But we are, you know, if anyone wants to share now, if they've, you know, what do you use? What do you prefer? Any issues that you've encountered in using either piece of language or reviewing either piece of language in the past year?
I don't think so.
Well, the survey's going out, so
Yeah.
you'll be able to do that. So otherwise, with the working group for the templates, the review of the request has been completed. Basically, what's next is Laura and I are going to get together and put the changes into the documents. We'll also update that field crosswalk that we have, especially as institutions look to program templates. Keeping this up to date is going to be key. And then we will also create a major changes document for this release, and we'll try and document every change in that major changes document going to people who, you know, need to communicate this across the various organizations and or to programmers or developers updating the templates for the 2019 release. One question that we do have for you all, though, and I expect that people will have varying opinions on this, is effective date. Do we need this field? Do we want this field? How do you use it now?
And I just want to say, as a reminder, that in our 80 somewhat FAQs, there is an FAQ on the effective date where we go into all different scenarios in terms of how to use it, which we did this year in the new version. I bet you didn't even know it was there. So, how are you using it? Do you still want it? Opinions. Microphone. No one cares. What? Well, let me ask, why did you bring it up? How did it come up in your template group?
So I think somebody just asked the question of, you know, kind of what is the utility of this field? It seems like an extra data point. So if you're talking about adding a budget period, you usually have a start and an end date for the budget period. So ostensibly, the start date for that budget period would be the effective date of the amendment. Sometimes, though, those dates surprisingly do not line up. That has to do with how institutions may be using it at their home institution. Maybe they do it the day that they issue the amendment. Maybe they do it the day that they draft the amendment. It could be the date that the request was made to them. Who knows? So that's not necessarily super intuitive to people. And then you have things like a PI change. Clearly you should state in the body of the text, you know, effective this date, the PI is changed from A to B. Because even in those instances, you'd have the effective date of the amendment and the effective date of the change being different dates. So they weren't lining up. And I think people's concern was that because there were those two data points there, that, you know, which is the right one? Which one do I use?
The earlier one. It says it in the FAQ. But anyway, let's hear your concerns.
Not a concern, just wanted to point out that I do use it, mostly with my USAID tranche issues.
Okay.
Yeah, your systems might be connected to it in some way. I mean, is this a data point that you use for any type of metric or any type of, no? Okay.
I think it's useless.
We got a useless.
Brenda's
going to
come up.
mic.
Okay.
All right.
And then I have a question after Brenda.
All right.
We feel strongly about it because we use it as the date that we sent the subaward out. And that why that's important to us is to track how long it takes to come back. And if it isn't back, then we can follow up.
So, out of curiosity, what do you do for new agreements? Because we don't have an effective date on, this field is not on the new awards, it's only on the modifications.
We use that same date, but we pull it from an email.
Okay, okay.
So for us, it's a metric.
For you guys, it's a metric. So let me ask a question. How many people would be perturbed if this field went away?
Brenda.
Brenda would be.
We can deal with it, but I'd be perturbed.
How many people would be glad to have one less field to fill out?
I almost fell off my chair.
All right. I thought that was going to be more of a debate. Wow. Okay.
Now we're down to 79 FAQs.
We got a question.
Oh, wait. Okay, microphone. No. I'm going to have to repeat it.
Come on.
Okay, what about the, so does anybody worry that if there's that effective date, and then there's a signature date?
Effective date and signature date not matching.
Correct. And then
Why would it?
Well, it shouldn't, but now you have something called effective date. And so, I mean.
What does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, I find that it would be confusing for certain parties that, you know, we have a fully executed is how we have it in a system as to when it was both signed by both parties, right? I just worry that effective date, again, what does that mean?
Okay, so the way we defined it in the FAQ, and unfortunately I don't have it in front of me, but it's the effective date of the change. So we use it in various ways. One, if you have an increment of funding, and that's all it is, then the effective date would be the start date of that budget period of the effective date of funding. At least this is what we put in the FAQ. If it was a PI change, it would be the date that in the notice of award, they have effectively recognized the PI change. If there are multiple dates of change in there, then we advise in the FAQ, use the earlier date as your effective date, and you lay out in the description of the template additional dates where there's an effective date of change. So really, the true definition, it's an effective date of some type of change. Here we go.
I just think that contractually, if there's an effective date of the change, you should put that in the explanation of the change, like if it's a PI. But generally, a change, if we're doing an amendment, it affects the entire contract. So if I'm saying, oh, I need to remove this term, I'm not saying, well, for the period before this effective date, this term didn't or did exist and now it doesn't exist. I think that if we want an effective date, we should say it in the change that we're making. Otherwise, the amendment changes the entire agreement as a whole, which I think is contractually what legally happens.
Right, and that's consistent with what we do with the unilateral modifications. The way that they're kind of structured is, you know, we're adding these dates in dollars. We're adding, so it's kind of just tacking on to the contract rather than saying effective this date the PI is changed from A to B, right? So
I think it's just more confusing. I get more pushback on that when and people like, you know, especially for-profit companies, they'll be like, well, we have to have this effective date the day we sign it, so can you change it? And I'm just like, change it to any day, I don't care.
So you take it as the day signed. That's how you interpret it?
That's how for-profit entities typically do.
And it should be in the, in the body
Yeah, we can't hear you.
I'll just volunteer to be a mic runner.
Okay, please, yes. Thank
I
you.
don't think anybody wants to get
They don't have to get up. You could, no, you could pass it around because you don't have to get up. Just, yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this?
Oh, actually, just to get really specific, in general, the effective date is the date that the federal awarding agency approved the change necessitating the modification, or the date the federal awarding agency authorizes the change to be effective as applicable. That's how we did it.
Right. Yep.
All right.
But since there's such variation in practice, maybe it's better to just remove it and we can tweak.
We can get rid of
FAQ.
it. Yes.
Well, we can actually probably just tweak it to say how should I structure some of the stuff around effective dates. Okay. So this actually segues into our next topic, which is going to be an update on the clinical trial agreements. But, what we did also want to bring up is in our conversations about the templates, we thought a lot about formatting and just making sure that our formatting makes the most sense possible. So what we're thinking about doing is having attachment 2 and then almost having an attachment 2A that will populate, or you will see it only when you select NIH as the funding agency. The reason that we thought that this would be good is NIH has a certain subset of particular terms and conditions that a lot of the other agencies don't have. And so we tend to hide those terms and conditions in the current iteration of the template. So we're talking about just, let's move it, let's have an NIH specific attachment 2A, and the things that will go in there are the multiple PI, certificate of confidentiality, and a checkbox for clinical trial designations as well on that attachment 2A page. And that's really just to make sure that people aren't confused by when something is applicable or not applicable by agency. So does anyone have any questions or concerns about that? So then this is going to go kind of bleed into the next part. So I'm going to leave this specific question just here, and we're going to kind of walk away from it and go over to the fixed rate clinical trial agreement, and then we'll kind of come back to the concept of this question in a little bit.
All right. So first of all, one of our wonderful working groups led by Brenda Kavanaugh and Jennifer McAllister, they have done a lot of work updating the fixed rate clinical trial sample. And right now what's on our website is an interim sample, but they've been working very hard on updating it. And I think one of you, or both of you, we're going to come up and just go through the next couple of slides to give an update on what you guys have done. And then we're going to get into a really great discussion. Okay.
We were in a fight about who was coming up. I lost.
It's okay.
Oh, do you want me to start here?
Yeah, please. So we've been meeting since the end of last year to revamp the clinical trial template. We did, thankfully, were able, with Stephanie's help, to put out an interim solution to get us through until we got this one done. So that one has a few of the changes that are going to be on the final version, but not all of them. And so some of the major revisions that we've come up with for the new version are going to be changing the name from clinical trial to clinical research. We have gotten some feedback that people are hesitant to use it because it said clinical trial, and it may fall in the broader bucket of clinical research. So we really wanted to encourage people to use it if you're doing clinical research and it doesn't fit that exact clinical trial mold, but you need additional terms that aren't found in the regular templates. We are changing the amount funded box to reference the payment schedule instead of trying to force people to put a dollar figure in there that doesn't make any sense. So that will go away. We are working very hard to align it to the other FDP templates. so that there won't be variation between, for example, attachment 2. As much as we can align them, there will be alignment. So we've done what we can do, and we're waiting on the regular sample to be done, and then we're going to align them as much as we can. In places where it doesn't make sense, obviously we won't. So on the attachment 4, where it talks about carryover, that's going to stay that it's not applicable, but everything else we'll try to line up as much as we can. We are going to be approaching Pamela about clarifying a couple of issues with NIH on UG interpretation and how to approach NIH about those. There are a couple places where there are uniform guidance requirements for data elements that don't exactly fit on a fixed rate. So there we're required to tell the subawardee how much money we've given them, which is impossible to do. And there's also a requirement on a certificate of completion for fixed price contracts that we aren't sure is gonna need to be done on this one, so we need to just clarify with NIH on those. And then we're just kind of doing general cleaning up and rearranging to put all of the clinical trial terms in attachment 2B. So there are a few things that were out on regular attachment 2 that are going to be moved around. And then we've also been working on a guidance document to go with it. It does not have 80 questions. It's much shorter.
Thank goodness.
I mean, it may get there one day, but right now it's brief. Because we wanted it to be a reference guide to kind of explain some of the things that we put in it and why we did what we did and answer questions that may come up. We also, in the past few weeks, have been working on a chart that Stephanie will go over that shows you when to use which template for what purpose. So hopefully that will give all of us some training tools to take back to our staff on when to use what.
And so this is a little bit about some of the minutia that we also get into, which is convening with the clinical trial sample group to talk to them about formatting, because we do want to try and harmonize that across the different templates as well. So it sounds easy, but it's actually not that easy. So we did end up talking to the clinical trial group about, or I should say clinical research group, sorry, about, what should we do in terms of how do we structure this? Do we put it into Adobe PDF? Are a lot of institutions actually putting this into a system, and should we have everything just in Word so that you can redline it and tweak it depending on the clinical trial? And then the kind of hybrid option that was brought forward is a PDF for everything except for attachment 2B, and having that be a Word document. So you can see there, these are some of the pros and cons that we talked about. And what we actually did before this meeting is we reached out to a couple of member institutions that we know have a large volume of clinical research, and we just asked them to jump on the phone with us and talk about these different formats and what made sense in their world and in their experience in using these templates and redlining them both as a pass-through entity or as a sub-organization. What did they think? And so it was interesting because it did come up that for the most part, what was being negotiated are the terms in 2B, and then things like institution name and making sure that that's correct. Those really seem to be the big hot ticket items on the clinical research template. So we do think that the option C, the PDF for everything except for attachment 2B, will probably be the best format.
I just want to remind folks, what is attachment 2B of the clinical research fixed rate agreement? Just a quick reminder, it's a special attachment that contains special terms and conditions just for those situations. It was originally meant for an NIH multi-site clinical trial. We're going to talk about all this in the chart in a minute. And so it contains such things such as confidentiality, monitoring, clinical trial auditing, record retention, publication, insurance, use of name, warranty, termination, and suspension. So I just want to remind you what 2B is and why we're carving that out, and the terms that are in there, because this is going to be very important as we get into discussion. Are we ready for the discussion? We're ready for the discussion. Okay, please be nice to one another. This is when things get nasty. All right, does Sherry have the mic? There you go. Yeah, you might need to run around a little bit. Okay, so this is where we're going to foster a little discussion. So if you came in a little bit late, you may not have received this chart. Are there any extras there, Jennifer? A couple of them. So if you're not on the subawards listserv and you didn't get a chart, remember to print this chart. We sent it a couple days ago. Or if you still need it, raise your hand. Jen is handing it out. This is a draft chart. This is what we've been drafting together. If you didn't get one, I'm sorry. If you could share with someone right near you. This is draft. We're going to be proposing a couple of things here that I'm going to need your opinions on. The clinical research working group started this, and we've really been fleshing it out. And as we flesh it out more, we've decided to make it even into the broader context of all our subaward templates and samples. And so let's take a step back. If you remember a couple of sessions ago, we talked about the different flavors of clinical trials now that NIH has this broadened definition of a clinical trial. And so as subawards specialists, or those issuing subawards, you can't just assume and look at a notice of award that says, yes, this is a clinical trial, and automatically pull that clinical trial or clinical research template. It doesn't work that way. And so we're going to propose a couple of things. And I think one of the key messages here today is, and what we're proposing, is the billing type, so how the subrecipient invoices, as well as the scope of work, is going to determine which template you use. It's those two things. It's the billing type and the scope of work. So I'm going to run down quickly each one, and then I'm going to pose questions to you, and then we're going to propose some things that we've been discussing, and we're going to see how you react. Here we go. So across the first line, if the prime award is a federal grant or cooperative agreement, and this is a typical, what we see most common, a cost reimbursable type of billing model where you're going to require cost reimbursable invoices. The subrecipient type is domestic, and the statement of work, it either doesn't have humans or animals, there's animal work, or it's human subjects not involved with a clinical trial. I have another column in here that's special for NIH, if applicable. So if we're dealing with NIH, and we know we use these templates for all types of sponsors, but if applicable, if the NOA has a clinical trial indicator, it's in the notice of award. If it says no, then very simply, you're going to use the FDP subaward cost reimbursable template. I don't even have any notes for that one. So that one's pretty straightforward, right? Let's move on. Line number 2, it's a federal grant or cooperative agreement, cost reimbursable invoices, it's a domestic subrecipient. Oh, wait, this is interesting, NIH specific. It includes a clinical trial that is not a traditional clinical trial as we know it. So this is where we have that different flavor of NIH clinical trials, where it's broadened. It's broadened. So we're not talking about drugs or devices. We're talking about maybe biobehavioral studies. We're talking about this new concept of basic science prospective research involving human subjects. So they're clinical trials, but in all likelihood, these studies were built on a cost reimbursable model. They're not what we typically think of as a clinical trial with a capitation or a per subject payment. And so in this case, you would use the FDP subaward cost reimbursement template. And what I'm saying here in the notes, I just reminded everyone what attachment 2B is. It was very specific for clinical trials, traditional clinical trials. And so what I'm saying here is attachment 2B of these additional terms and conditions shouldn't be necessary for these types of clinical trials with a cost reimbursement billing model, because there's no per subject component. So, any feedback on that and what I'm proposing here? Would anybody add additional terms or think that they would do that for this type of clinical trial? Everyone's in agreement with what I'm proposing here. Thumbs up. This is when things get tricky. Now, next line. Again, federal grant cooperative agreement, cost reimbursable invoices, domestic site. Uh-oh, look at this. A traditional clinical trial, such as a phase 2, 3, 4 drug study or a device. Yes, in the indicator of the notice of award. So, how often do we see this? Where we see a cost reimbursement model that's a clinical trial. Shouldn't it be fixed rate? I do know, and I hear from quite a few of you, that as subrecipients, sometimes you receive these in rare circumstances, maybe because for whatever reason it was negotiated that first way, maybe, who knows. So what we're saying here is that if you have to issue an FDP subaward using the cost reimbursement model, that what we're saying is you should include attachment 2B with that, with those additional terms, because it's a traditional clinical trial. So it should have things in there such as publication and insurance and warranty. And so, but again, this should really be in rare circumstances, because the whole point of those clinical trials should be on a per subject capitation basis. So do I have any comments or questions or concerns about this guidance? Think about it for a minute. Okay, we got one? Okay, here we go.
So I think you have to distinguish between when the sub-award, which is a cost reimbursement award, is being given to a site enrolling patients versus being given to a sub-awardee that's going to allow the process to last for all of the sites. Because maybe 2B is not necessary in that, maybe in that second scenario, the study is a clinical trial, but the site isn't really, they're not participating in the clinical trial as an enrolling site.
You raise a really interesting point when I start thinking about the efficiency of issuing subawards and how much, the specialists or the individuals at your organization, those individuals that issue the subawards are going to dig deep to find those things. And so it becomes partially a training issue, or, it's just something to think about. And I don't know if anyone has anything else to add on that. Yep. And, here you go.
I've been thinking about a situation that I've come across a couple of times that might not fit in here, and it might actually be that. So I just wanted to regurgitate to see if it is the same thing.
Sure.
On a few instances, we've received something off of the clinical trial, clinical research, dose rate sample, but it's just for infrastructure costs. Is that the same thing? Is that similar, but not exactly the same? Okay. But I think it's the same issue, is that you're fitting a square into a circle, and the infrastructure projects become a problem for us because I'm trying to convince my institution that there are not human subjects, but I'm getting a clinical research dose rate sample. So it kind of confuses me.
Do you have a comment on that one? No? Yeah. McAllister's going to answer this. Go ahead.
I think at the end of the day, what's not happening is in our offices, people just aren't paying attention to what the sub is doing. And so it's very easy to just make these into widgets when they're not. And so in that case, probably somebody looked and said, oh yes, this is a clinical trial, but didn't really look through the scope of work to see that this entity is only running samples.
Okay.
So we get that, but we also get on the flip side, hey, I'm enrolling in a clinical trial at my institution, and you gave me the cost reimbursable agreement, and we really are enrolling subjects in a clinical trial, and we need more protective terms than what you're giving us. So I think it's being open on both sides, that even if you don't catch it when you're issuing it, being receptive to having the sub say, hey, we looked at the scope of work and this is what we're doing and we need to change the terms, because often I run into institutions who aren't willing to do that, who just say, sorry, we only use the cost reimbursable template and that's it. So.
All right. So moving on. Oh, we got another one.
I agree 100% on the SOW review. Also, if you're going to use the criteria that is marked yes for clinical trial, then be sure that we fortify with but in the cases of statement of work or because of one. Just so that doesn't become, well, it says it's clinical trial.
Right.
You're right.
There's another one back there.
I just have a comment on the folks who use like cost reimbursable for everything.
Uh-huh.
When your auditor comes on site, I don't know how many of you know this, but fixed amount of awards are exempt from subpart E, the cost principles, when your auditor comes on site. So if your auditor pulls a fixed award, they cannot apply the cost principles when they do their testing. So if you're using cost reimbursable and your auditor sees that, they're going to want to apply subpart E. And that can be an issue in some cases. So
Oh, McAllister's, yep, another one. It's a good one.
I think you just want to put rarely in the column that talks about the subrecipient's payment model, so that it's clear from the get-go.
Got it.
This is really not the standard.
Thank you. All right, so now we're going to get even more controversial here. Wait till you hear this one. Okay. The next line, that is a federal grant or cooperative agreement, contains both a cost reimbursement and fixed rate invoices, what we like to call the dreaded word, a hybrid agreement or a Frankenstein agreement. So it's again to domestic entities. And so we see these things come up, I certainly hear about them, which may include a per patient enrollment schedule for a clinical research or a clinical trial, and a cost reimbursement component, for example, a PI's travel expenses to attend meetings. And so the notice of award may be either yes or no in this case. And so these hybrid there is no such thing as an FDP template that is this hybrid model. But what we've been seeing are institutions that are using the cost reimbursement template and including 2 different scopes of work and 2 different billing models in one award because they want to issue fewer subawards, which I get. I get the fact that institutions don't want to issue more than one subaward. However, we understand that for whatever reason, institutions may want to do this. So here's our proposal. In these types of situations, for whatever reason, if you must have this hybrid agreement, we're going to say that you have to remove the FDP moniker because we do not have such an FDP approved template. And we don't want one. And, and to Jason's point back there, from an audit perspective, I don't know how you can combine 2 different billing models. So, discuss, I'm waiting to hear it. Here we go.
I actually just have a quick question.
Yeah.
If somebody was to issue 2 different subcontracts, do you think that it would be appropriate to charge overhead on both of them? Like the under 25, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. And I've definitely encountered that where there's multiple subawards to the same institution, if there are multiple scopes of work, et cetera. I've been told that you can still charge overhead twice.
And we've done that when it's separate statements of work. I don't think I've encountered this type of situation specifically because this seems like it's almost, yes, it's 2 separate scopes of work, but like this PI is still overseeing the clinical portion, so it's like,
It depends, though, on whether or not they truly are, because sometimes you will find that the clinical site investigator may be different than the person who's maybe on the DSMB steering
So it'd be
committee
easier
or
to split it
something,
up.
so it might be easier to split it up that way.
This is a depends situation.
Yeah, that's a depends.
So I think my question is, like, I understand the hesitation to engage in another template, because we have a lot of them. But this seems to me like it's an IDIQ contract, which we get from the feds already, right? It's an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity, to some extent. Because we are seeing these things sometimes at the feds where they're mixed, where we're getting some pieces cost reimbursable and some piece as a per patient or per sample.
IDIQ, you're talking about federal contract, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's not this template at all. That is the very, yeah.
Sorry, I understand that they're making the correlation between the feds have a model for doing this.
Oh.
So why can't we use that in this circumstance?
So we'd have to create a master sub-template, and then we'd have to have a set, like, you'd have to be able to add almost like the task orders. And frankly, it's a lot of maintenance. So, like that, one of the things that we kind of have to guard a little bit against is we need a reasonable number of templates that people can train their staff on and use routinely. And they need to be as simple as we can possibly make them to actually be effective in reducing the administrative burden. So my concern about creating a subaward template for this very small subset of instances where you've got a PI who's maybe on a steering committee and is also enrolling clinical patients is not that many. I mean, if you're running a large clinical trial with 300 sites, that's probably impacting like maybe 25 to 50 investigators, and we're gonna have to go through and update these templates so routinely and do all of that. So I think like that is my concern. I think if people really press on it and they really want it, and it turns out that the estimations we have on numbers is totally off and it's a lot, then yes, we will certainly open that discussion, but I think that's where we came from in this suggestion.
Yeah, that makes sense, thank you.
Okay, I know Jessica has a question in the back.
I was just gonna say, like, it's only what you're saying, and I agree with it, is that it's legally possible, but it's not clean, and so maybe just isn't the place for everything.
If you want to have a template for your own institution and have that, then I don't think I think that's reasonable, right?
That's your own institution's doing.
Yeah.
The question was more about like lessons learned that we could take from that.
And that, to piggyback on the lessons learned, I'm wondering if we're kind of creating this problem unnecessarily by being overly cautious on what needs to be in a cost reimbursement. Because when I think about most, and I'm sure my institution is equally guilty of this, most hybrid subaward agreements are the per patient amount, which is the fixed rate, and then cost reimbursement winds up either being some combination of steering committee, startup costs, and travel. And why can't steering committee, startup costs, and travel be fixed rates? Like steering committee is $3,000 a year, startup costs are $10,000, and it's a fixed rate, and travel is $2,000 times however many trips you need to take. Am I being...
So I've actually seen the travel given directly to the investigators, depending on how they structure, is they put into the PTE for reimbursement for their travel directly instead of going to and putting it in at their home institution. I'm not sure every institution would love that, but I have seen that occur. So that's another potential choice. Startup is fixed. Yeah, so I mean, if there were startup costs, then yeah, I would say if that's a fixed cost, then it would go into the fixed rate.
And just to clarify, DSMB or any of the other places that PIs are serving on, that is a different scope of work. In a clinical trial, the protocol is the scope of work.
Right.
So anything that you're doing outside of performing the protocol is not part of the scope of work of a clinical trial agreement.
I just want to say too that we found that even if someone's issuing a fully fixed rate agreement, that the payment terms are often unclear. So to mix the two together makes it even worse. And we would like everyone to focus on making more robust, detailed fixed rate terms so that we know how to get paid. And I also have to say that at my institution we do have a policy of not double charging the same site twice. which is just our own policy, you know, so I'm not saying it's unlawful, but I think people can open that up and explore it. They can get for waivers. That's really the only thing stopping them from issuing to subawards that would really make it a lot easier.
Okay. Oh, Nate.
And as a social work office, please don't do that to me. It's very difficult to manage within our system, and we have a kind of a workaround we can do for that. But the odds that the research team is going to be able to manage that correctly to get the costs where they're supposed to go are very slim.
Okay.
Correct.
I know we only have like 5 minutes.
Cost reimbursable and fixed rate coverage.
Okay. So we only got 5 minutes left, and we just want to wrap up this session before we go. Just one other thing I'll highlight on the chart, which is further down, you'll notice we do have definitions. We do define the difference between fixed amount versus fixed rate. And for fixed rate, this new clinical research fixed rate agreement, again, it's not limited to just clinical trials anymore. It's about the billing type. It's a per subject enrollment billing type, and so that's why we broaden it to just clinical research studies. So I think if you have any other questions or comments about this chart, feel free to email us at the subawards our email address, which is at the end, and we'll keep you posted. So thank you. Continue to give us feedback on it. Thank you. We're going to move on to the rest of the slides. So these are mostly just updates. So working group, late subs, the survey is almost complete. So we're just kind of walking through, making sure that the language is right. And then we're going to send it to the executive committee before we send it out there. And then we will be sending it to the admin reps and posting to the listserv. Please submit one response per submitting office. Please try and coordinate amongst yourselves. We know that the admin rep is not always up to date, which is why we're going to post it in both locations, but do chat. FQ, the financial questionnaire. So you may have seen on the listserv a couple of, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, there was a special working group led by Leslie, I can never remember her last, I keep saying Leslie Schmidt. Simberg Schmidt. Okay, from University of Minnesota, and Sarah Clough led that working group where they sent out a draft questionnaire. It's a financial questionnaire meant for entities not subject to single audit. Let me repeat, not subject to single audit. When we sent it out, a couple of individuals were confused, you know, because they're like, wait a minute, this is too expensive for a single audit entity. And I'm like, no, it's not for a single audit entity. So anyway, we got a decent response rate. We received 41 responses, and 35 of those 41 responses indicated that they would be interested in testing out the financial questionnaire at their institution in some sort of pilot. So we're going to explore the next phase of this to see what a pilot of that would look like. And so these are just the next steps. So we're going to determine what kind of metrics we want to collect, how to design the pilot, and so we will keep you updated on the next steps of that. For those of you that like being up at 8 o'clock in the morning, we are going to be having our next session with the IACOOK and working through our collaboration with them in a little bit more detail. So please attend, and if you're not able to attend, engage with your IACOOK and share the slide deck from that session with them and connect with us. So we are also continuing to collaborate with the data use group, and we're working on T's and C's to cover DTUA obligations that can be incorporated into the subaward. That process is ongoing. And then we also have the subcontract sample. We just have a couple of questions that we're finalizing, and then we're going to have the final draft out for people to speak now or forever hold their peace, probably early next week. And we've done a lot of the other updates, and that is all we have. What do you guys have? Who's going to talk to me about Game of Thrones?
Spoilers.
I'm not saying anything, but anyone who did see it, you can talk to me about it at the reception. Oh, is that it? Reminder. That's it. All right, we're done. Bye.